India's decision to end its major trade relationship with the United States is one of the boldest and most transformative steps in modern global politics, and at the heart of this lies the rejection of dependency. For decades, India has walked a careful path with America, balancing cooperation with caution, aware of the immense opportunities but equally wary of the traps hidden within the so-called partnership. While trade with the United States opened doors to certain markets, technology, and capital, the deeper reality was that the relationship was never based on equality. Washington benefited disproportionately, exploiting India's vast population and expanding markets while dictating terms that often undermined India's sovereignty. When the mask of friendship is removed, what remains is a clear imbalance. America treated India as a consumer of its goods and a follower of its strategic line rather than as a partner worthy of respect. By decisively ending this trade dependency, India is breaking a cycle of exploitation and sending an unshakable message that its dignity, sovereignty, and independence are non-negotiable. The imbalance was not merely economic but structural. The United States repeatedly used tariffs, sanctions threats, and export controls as tools of pressure against India, whether it was denying advanced technology, blocking critical defense supplies under pretexts, or selectively targeting Indian goods through tariff hikes. The pattern remained the same. America wanted to keep India dependent, but never empowered. Whenever India sought to assert its independent policies, whether on oil imports from Iran or defense cooperation with Russia, Washington's response was not understanding but coercion. Sanction threats became the language of diplomacy, and that language revealed the truth. India was not treated as a friend, but as a pawn. This lopsided dynamic deeply harmed India's growth potential, forcing compromises and fostering insecurity about what the US might restrict next. Equally important is the political dimension of this dependency. America's trade partnership was never just about economics. It came tied with political expectations. India was repeatedly pushed to align with Washington's foreign policy, whether in its stance towards China, Russia, or the Middle East. The message was clear: trade benefits were conditional upon obedience. A sovereign nation cannot thrive under such conditions. India, with its thousand-year-old civilization, its vast population, and its rising economic power, cannot accept a partnership where independence is sacrificed at the altar of convenience. To end this dependency is not only about protecting markets, it is about reclaiming freedom in decision-making, ensuring that no foreign capital dictates the course of India's global choices. Dependency also carried hidden costs for India's domestic industries. American dominance in sectors like pharmaceuticals, technology, agriculture, and services created vulnerabilities. Local industries found themselves undercut by subsidized American imports, while Indian companies seeking access to US markets faced endless restrictions and regulations. Even the celebrated outsourcing and IT services boom that linked India and America often masked a deeper inequality. While India provided talent and labor at lower costs, the greatest profits and intellectual property rights remained concentrated in American hands. In effect, India was feeding America's growth while receiving limited leverage in return. To break free from this arrangement is to protect and empower India's own industries, to ensure that its growth benefits its own people rather than fueling another nation's dominance. There is also a psychological dimension to this dependency, one that touches upon national pride. A nation of over 1 billion people with nuclear power status, a space program, and one of the world's fastest-growing economies cannot continue to be treated as a subordinate. Yet dependency on America kept alive an outdated narrative that India's rise was conditional on Western approval. This narrative is dangerous because it undermines confidence in self-reliance and diminishes the value of India's independent achievements. By cutting trade ties with America, India is rejecting that narrative and affirming to its citizens in the world that it does not need validation from Washington to be great. Of course, the decision carries risks, as every bold move does. America remains a massive economy, and disengaging from it means short-term adjustments and challenges. But India's leaders understand that dependency is more dangerous than difficulty. A dependency makes a nation vulnerable to manipulation at the worst possible moment. If tomorrow America were to weaponize trade against India in the way it has done with others, India would be at its mercy. The choice to end dependency now ensures resilience in the future. It is a preemptive step taken not out of weakness but out of strength to secure long-term independence, even if it requires weathering storms in the short term. The broader world context reinforces why this move is so timely. The global order is shifting rapidly away from unipolarity. America's dominance is being challenged in Asia, Africa, and beyond as more nations grow weary of being dictated to. For India, continuing dependency on America at such a moment would have been contradictory to its role as a future global leader. By breaking free, India places itself firmly within the emerging multipolar framework, aligning itself with the global trend rather than resisting it. It is a recognition that the 21st century will not be about one power dictating to others, but about multiple powers shaping a shared order. This rejection of dependency also sends a message to other nations. India is leading by example. Too often, smaller nations hesitate to resist American pressure, fearing economic retaliation. By standing tall, India demonstrates that it is possible to walk away, that sovereignty is not a luxury but a necessity. This will inspire other nations to rethink their own dependencies, to question whether the benefits they receive from Washington truly outweigh the cost. India is not just freeing itself, it is paving the way for a wider movement of economic and political self-determination. The moral clarity of this decision cannot be overstated. Dependency corrodes independence. It conditions nations to compromise their values for short-term gain. It creates relationships of inequality that breed resentment and mistrust. India's refusal to continue down this path reflects a deeper understanding that true partnership must be based on mutual respect, not manipulation. Ending trade with America does not mean isolationism. It means redefining partnerships on fairer terms, ensuring that no external power can dictate India's destiny. India's rejection of dependency on America is a historic act of reclaiming control. It affirms sovereignty, protects industries, restores dignity, and places India at the forefront of the global shift towards multipolarity. It is a rejection of fear and an embrace of courage. By choosing this path, India has declared to the world that it will no longer be bound by the shackles of dependency, that its future will be written by its own hands, and that its people will no longer live under the shadow of another nation's dominance. This is the beginning of a new chapter in India's story, one defined not by dependence on the West, but by independence, resilience, and unshakable pride in its own strength. India's decision to end trade ties with the United States is not just a matter of economics, it is a strategic and political declaration that reflects a new direction in world affairs. For years, the economic partnership with Washington was presented as a pillar of India's growth story, but beneath the numbers lay a network of political strings. America's trade policies were rarely just about goods or services. They were always linked to broader geopolitical agendas. When India purchased energy from Iran, America intervened. When India explored defense cooperation with Russia, America responded with sanctioned threats. When India charted its own policy in multilateral organizations, it was often pressured to fall in line with Washington's goals. Such a relationship reveals that trade was a tool of influence, not a platform of equality. Ending that cycle is not merely an economic choice, but a political declaration. India will not be dictated to, it will not trade sovereignty for market access, and it will not compromise its independence to please another power. Strategically, this decision represents a break from the illusion of alignment with America's vision of the world. Washington sought to frame India as a counterweight to China, an ally in its global rivalry, and a compliant partner in enforcing Western-led rules. Yet this vision did not match India's own priorities. India is not interested in being drawn into another nation's competition. It is interested in securing its own rise as an independent global power. The strategic realignment, therefore, lies in rejecting the role of a subordinate ally and asserting the role of a sovereign leader. India does not wish to become Asia's version of a Western proxy, tied into military pacts or dependent on American technology. Instead, India's ambition is to craft its own alliances, diversify its economic ties, and create a balance that prevents domination by any single power. This shift is also a recognition of global realities. The world of today is not the world of the Cold War or the early 2000s when America's influence was unrivaled. We live in a multipolar order where power is dispersed across regions and where no single nation can claim dominance without resistance. China's rise, Russia's resilience, and the growing confidence of nations in Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East all signal a world where alternative partnerships are abundant. To remain tethered to America at such a time would be strategically short-sighted. By stepping away, India is aligning with the tide of history rather than resisting it. It is placing itself among those who are shaping the new order, not clinging to the old one. There is a deeper political message as well. America has long sought to use trade as leverage for political concessions. When India declined to cut all ties with Russia after the Ukraine conflict, Washington applied pressure expecting compliance. But India refused, demonstrating that it will not abandon old allies at the demand of others. When India refused to shut down imports of discounted Russian oil, it signaled that its energy security would not be sacrificed for another nation's geopolitical agenda. In each of these moments, trade and strategy were intertwined, and the pressure from America revealed the limits of the so-called partnership. Now, by decisively ending trade dependency, India has severed the very mechanism of that pressure. Without the leverage of markets and goods, America's ability to coerce India is diminished. This is not just economic diversification, it is strategic liberation. The political significance also extends domestically. Within India, the perception of being overly dependent on the West has often fueled criticism and unease. Citizens, industries, and policymakers alike have questioned why a rising superpower should allow itself to be constrained by Washington's demands. Ending the trade dependency sends a powerful signal to the Indian people: their nation is no longer beholden to any foreign power. It strengthens the legitimacy of the government, demonstrating that it prioritizes sovereignty over short-term concessions. Politically, it galvanizes national pride, uniting people under the banner of independence in the economic and strategic domains alike. Strategically, this shift opens doors to new alliances that better reflect India's interests. With Russia, the relationship is one of mutual trust, grounded in decades of defense cooperation and energy ties. With China, despite disputes, the opportunity for pragmatic engagement cannot be ignored. Beyond these, India is free to deepen relations with Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America without being constrained by America's geopolitical rivalries. Such flexibility is invaluable. It allows India to act as a balancer in global politics, engaging with multiple poles of power and maximizing benefits without falling into the trap of permanent alignments. The freedom to maneuver is the true strength of a sovereign foreign policy, and this move restores that freedom fully. Ending trade with America also redefines India's image on the world stage. For too long, the narrative of India's rise was tied to its cooperation with the United States. Western media and policymakers often portrayed India as successful only because of its links to American markets and technology. By breaking away, India rewrites that narrative. It asserts that its rise is self-driven, rooted in its own capacity, its own partnerships, and its own strategic choices. It shows the world that India is not an extension of Western power, but an independent pole of power in itself. This redefinition is crucial as global leadership is contested. A nation that defines its own path commands more respect than one that follows the shadow of another. Critics will argue that disengaging from America risks isolation, but this misunderstands the essence of multipolarity. Isolation occurs when a nation has no alternatives, but India is surrounded by alternatives. Russia offers energy and defense, China offers markets and technology, Asia and Africa offer growth opportunities, and regional organizations offer platforms for leadership. India does not need to cling to America's trade to survive or thrive. In fact, by limiting dependency, India avoids the risk of being dragged into conflicts or sanctions that are not of its making. Strategically, this ensures that India's growth path remains stable, even as global tensions fluctuate. The realignment is also about values. While America preaches democracy and partnership, Its policies have often betrayed arrogance and double standards. It imposed conditions on trade, withheld technology, and pressured India to sacrifice its own interests for Washington's benefit. Such behavior contradicts the principles of equality and respect. By ending the dependency, India is aligning its actions with its values. It is saying that true partnership must be based on fairness, and if fairness is denied, then alternative paths will be chosen. This moral clarity strengthens India's voice in international forums, making it a champion of equality in global relations. Strategically, the long-term implications are profound. Without America's overbearing influence, India is free to pursue indigenous development, strengthen its manufacturing base, and chart its own course in technology and defense. It can invest in building supply chains with trusted partners, reducing vulnerabilities to external shocks. It can craft trade agreements that prioritize Indian industries rather than subordinating them. It can build a global role not as a junior partner in an American-led bloc, but as a leader in a coalition of equals. This is not a retreat from globalization, it is an embrace of globalization on India's terms. Ultimately, the decision to end trade ties with America and realign strategically is a declaration of confidence. It reflects confidence in India's economic resilience, in its ability to survive without dependency, and in its capacity to lead in a multipolar order. It is political in that it reasserts sovereignty, strategic in that it broadens options, and symbolic in that it rejects subordination. It is not a move of isolation, but of liberation. By breaking free from a relationship that carried more control than cooperation, India is stepping into a future where it can act fully as a great power, unencumbered by the constraints of dependency and unafraid of the consequences of independence. India's strengthening of its partnership with Russia in the wake of ending trade dependency on America is not just a continuation of old ties, but an affirmation of trust built over decades. The India-Russia relationship is unique in the world of international diplomacy, rooted in consistency, loyalty, and mutual respect that has withstood changes in global alignments and political storms. When India found itself isolated during difficult times in the past, it was Russia that stood by its side, providing military support, energy resources, and diplomatic backing in moments of need. Unlike America, which often treated cooperation with India as a tool to advance its own global strategies, Russia consistently treated India as an equal partner, willing to share not just resources but also technology and knowledge. In deepening this relationship now, India is recognizing the reliability of a friend who has proven time and again that true partnership is measured not in words but in action. Russia's role in India's defense and security landscape is one of the clearest examples of this trust. For decades, Russia has been India's largest supplier of defense equipment, providing advanced systems ranging from fighter jets and submarines to missile defense platforms like the S-400. More than just sales, Russia has been willing to transfer technology, co-develop systems, and build capability within India itself. This distinguishes Russia's approach from America's, which often comes with restrictions, end-user conditions, and little willingness to share critical technology. Through cooperation with Russia, India has developed a defense capability that is not only advanced, but also independent of Western controls. This independence is vital at a time when global tensions can lead to supply chain disruptions and when America has repeatedly used sanctions as a weapon. Russia has shown that it is willing to respect India's sovereignty in defense cooperation, and this makes it an indispensable partner in ensuring India's security. Energy is another cornerstone of this partnership. Russia, with its vast reserves of oil and natural gas, has long been a critical supplier to energy-hungry India. When the Ukraine crisis brought Western sanctions crashing down on Russian energy exports, many expected India to abandon its imports under American pressure. Yet India chose pragmatism over obedience, continuing to purchase Russian oil at discounted rates to ensure the stability of its own economy. This was not only a practical decision, but also a reaffirmation of trust between the two nations. Russia, in turn, provided India with stable supplies in a volatile market, strengthening the bond of reliability. By turning to Russia for energy, India ensures that its growth is not held hostage by Western energy politics, and by expanding this cooperation further, India lays the foundation for long-term energy security that will power its industries and its people. Diplomatically, Russia has also been a consistent ally of India on the global stage. From supporting India's position in the United Nations during critical conflicts to backing its aspirations for a permanent seat on the Security Council, Russia has repeatedly demonstrated respect for India's status as a major power. Unlike America, which often uses international platforms to pressure or lecture India on issues ranging from human rights to climate commitments, Russia engages India as a peer. This difference matters because it reflects the ethos of the partnership: non-interference, mutual respect, and recognition of sovereignty. For India, aligning closer with Russia is not about turning away from the world, but about anchoring itself with a partner that respects its independence in decision-making. Economically, there is immense potential in expanding ties with Russia beyond defense and energy. Agriculture, pharmaceuticals, infrastructure, and technology are sectors where cooperation can flourish. Russia's vast land and natural resources complement India's massive population and market demand, creating opportunities for joint ventures that can strengthen both economies. The potential of the international North-South transport corridor, which connects India to Russia via Iran and Central Asia, opens new avenues for trade and reduces dependence on Western-controlled routes. By tapping into these opportunities, India and Russia can build an economic relationship that is not only resilient but also a model of alternative globalization, one that is not centered on the West but rooted in Eurasian connectivity. One of the most significant aspects of the India-Russia relationship is the absence of conditionality. When Russia cooperates with India, it does so without demanding alignment on every global issue. For instance, while Moscow maintains its close ties with China, it has never forced India to alter its policies towards Beijing. Similarly, while India has grown closer to Western economies in the past, Russia never viewed this as betrayal, but as a sovereign choice. This flexibility is rare in global politics and underscores why the partnership is durable. America's partnerships often crumble when its allies refuse to toe the line. Russia's partnership endures precisely because it is based on mutual understanding. In choosing to lean on Russia now, India is also sending a broader signal about what kind of partnerships it values. It is saying that reliability matters more than rhetoric, respect matters more than dominance, and shared interests matter more than imposed agendas. This aligns perfectly with India's vision of a multipolar world, where cooperation is voluntary and based on equality. By strengthening its bond with Russia, India shows that it is not seeking to replace one dependency with another, but to build balanced, diversified relationships that allow for genuine independence. Critics may point out that Russia's current global position, weakened by Western sanctions, limits its ability to contribute significantly to India's growth. But this perspective underestimates Russia's resilience and ignores the complementary strengths of both nations. Even under sanctions, Russia remains a giant in energy, defense, and natural resources. India, with its booming economy and massive market, provides Russia with access and stability that it needs. Together, they can form a partnership of necessity that evolves into a partnership of strength. Moreover, by standing with Russia when many have turned away, India secures a level of loyalty and trust that no amount of Western aid or trade could replicate. The future of this partnership also holds strategic value beyond bilateral ties. By working with Russia, India strengthens its hand in regional forums like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS. These platforms are increasingly shaping global debates on trade, security, and development, offering alternatives to Western-dominated institutions like the G7 and NATO. Within these groups, India's alignment with Russia enhances its ability to influence decisions and to shape the rules of the new order. This is not just about friendship, it is about positioning India as a central player in a multipolar system where it can exercise real leadership. Ultimately, India's renewed emphasis on its partnership with Russia is about securing a trusted ally in a world of shifting powers. It is about ensuring that defense, energy and diplomacy remain stable even as global politics becomes unpredictable. It is about rewarding loyalty and respecting history while also building new pathways for cooperation in the future. Most of all, it is about ensuring that India's rise is not dependent on those who seek to control it, but supported by those who respect it. In deepening ties with Russia, India is not just turning to an old friend, it is reinforcing the principle that true partnerships are built on respect, trust, and equality. This principle will guide India not just in its dealings with Russia, but in the new world it is helping to shape. India's decision to expand economic cooperation with China, despite the complex and sometimes tense history between the two nations, marks a pragmatic and forward-looking strategy that reflects the realities of global power dynamics in the 20th. For decades, India and China have been portrayed as rivals locked in competition over borders, influence, and regional dominance. Skirmishes, disputes, and mistrust have undeniably shaped their relationship. Yet the decision to move beyond this antagonism is rooted in a recognition that rivalry alone cannot define the future. Pragmatism requires that both nations, as the two largest populations in the world and two of the fastest-growing economies, find common ground where cooperation can serve their mutual interests. India's outreach to China is not about abandoning caution or forgetting history, but about embracing an approach that prioritizes growth, development, and balance over endless hostility. China is a global economic engine, a manufacturing powerhouse, and a central player in international supply chains. For India to ignore this reality would mean isolating itself from opportunities that could accelerate its own rise. Over the past few decades, China has demonstrated an ability to transform itself into the world's factory, dominating industries ranging from electronics to renewable energy, from textiles to technology hardware. By strengthening economic ties with China, India gains access to this vast capacity, enabling it to boost its own industries through affordable imports, joint ventures, and technology transfers. For a country committed to becoming a $10 trillion economy in the near future, building bridges with China ensures that development is not slowed by geopolitical rivalries. Cooperation here is not about surrendering to China's strength, but about using that strength to enhance India's own trajectory. This partnership is also a matter of necessity in the face of Western attempts to control global trade. America and its allies have repeatedly sought to weaponize economic dependence, using sanctions, tariffs, and restrictions as tools of coercion. By collaborating with China, India ensures that it does not remain vulnerable to Western trade barriers or supply chain disruptions. China's vast market and export capacity offer India resilience and alternatives at a time when diversifying trade is crucial. For India, this cooperation is not a sign of weakness but of strategic foresight, choosing to anchor itself in Asia rather than remain tied to the whims of a distant Western power. Beyond economics, there is a geopolitical logic at play. The global order is rapidly shifting toward multipolarity, and in this transformation, Asia is emerging as the central stage. India and China, together with Russia, form a triad of power that has the potential to counterbalance Western hegemony. While disputes remain between India and China, the broader picture is clear. Both nations benefit from reducing hostility and increasing coordination. Rivalry benefits Washington, which thrives on dividing Asian powers to maintain its influence in the region. Cooperation, on the other hand, benefits Asia itself, creating a balance of power where the continent leads rather than follows. India's willingness to explore pragmatic engagement with China is thus not about trust in Beijing's goodwill, but about understanding that unity, even partial and pragmatic, strengthens Asia as a whole. Economic interdependence also creates stability. Nations that trade, invest, and collaborate are less likely to descend into open conflict, as the costs of war rise with the depth of shared interests. By fostering trade with China, India creates a layer of economic deterrence against future hostilities. Border disputes may continue, but both nations will think twice before escalating to dangerous levels when billions of dollars of mutual trade and projects are at stake. This does not eliminate competition, it redefines it. India and China can compete in areas like technology, infrastructure, and global influence while still cooperating where mutual benefits exist. Such competitive cooperation is a hallmark of modern multipolar diplomacy and ensures that rivalry does not consume opportunities for growth. China also offers India valuable lessons in economic transformation. Over the past 4 decades, China has lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty, built world-class infrastructure, and become a leader in industries from high-speed rail to artificial intelligence. India, with its own ambitions of modernization, can learn from China's successes while avoiding its mistakes. Cooperation in areas like renewable energy, smart cities, manufacturing, and digital innovation can accelerate India's development goals. For instance, joint ventures in green technology could help India meet its climate commitments, while cooperation in infrastructure could transform its urban landscape. By selectively adopting best practices and technologies, India ensures that it does not lag behind in the race for innovation. This relationship also extends beyond bilateral ties to multilateral platforms. Both India and China are central members of BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where their cooperation influences decisions on trade, finance, and security. These platforms are gaining prominence as alternatives to Western-led institutions, and by working with China within them, India amplifies its influence in shaping global rules. Instead of being constrained by rivalry, India's engagement with China in these forums positions it as a co-architect of the new order, ensuring that Asia's voice is heard in global debates on currency, technology, and development. Of course, the move toward cooperation with China is not without criticism. Many will argue that India risks undermining its security by engaging with a rival. Yet such criticisms ignore the fact that disengagement has not eliminated conflict in the past. In fact, it has sometimes fueled mistrust. Cooperation does not mean ignoring threats. It means managing them intelligently. India can and will continue to strengthen its military, secure its borders, and protect its sovereignty while also pursuing trade and investment with China. Engagement allows India to compartmentalize disputes and prevent them from derailing opportunities for progress. It is the recognition that permanent hostility benefits no one but those who seek to exploit divisions. The broader benefit of this pragmatic approach is the strengthening of Asia's collective voice. For centuries, the West has dominated global trade, finance, and politics by keeping Asia divided. Today, cooperation between India and China, even if limited to specific sectors, challenges that dominance. Together, the two nations represent nearly 3 billion people, enormous markets, and unparalleled productive capacity. If their cooperation deepens, they can redefine the rules of global trade, shape the future of technology, and create institutions that reflect their own values rather than those imposed by others. India's willingness to pursue this path ensures that Asia no longer remains a passive subject of Western strategy, but becomes the driver of its own destiny. In reaching out to China, India is not discarding caution. It is redefining strategy. It is not erasing history, but learning from it, recognizing that the future cannot be shaped by old entities alone. By engaging pragmatically, India strengthens its economy, secures its independence from Western coercion, and contributes to an Asian balance that is vital for global stability. The decision to cooperate with China, therefore, is not an act of naivety but of strategic maturity. It acknowledges the complexities of rivalry while refusing to let those complexities prevent progress. Ultimately, India's pragmatic cooperation with China symbolizes a shift from the politics of confrontation to the politics of opportunity. It is about transforming rivalry into a relationship that, while competitive, is also constructive. It is about recognizing that the future of the world will be shaped in Asia and that India must play a central role in shaping it, not by standing apart from China, but by working with it where it serves India's interests. This is the essence of a sovereign foreign policy, the ability to engage with both friends and rivals on terms that advance the nation's own goals. In embracing this pragmatism, India shows the world that it is not bound by the chains of the past, but guided by the possibilities of the future. India's embrace of multipolarity by breaking away from dependency on the United States marks a transformative shift in how it sees itself and its place in the world. For much of the post-Cold War period, the global system was dominated by a single power, America, whose influence extended across economics, politics, and security. Nations were expected to align themselves within this unipolar order or risk isolation and punishment. Many smaller states complied out of fear, while others sought protection under Washington's umbrella. But India's ambitions have always been larger than survival. As a civilization state with millennia of history, it was inevitable that India would one day reject the idea of fitting into a world designed and controlled by others. The decision to move away from America's shadow and toward a more balanced set of partnerships reflects not only a strategic calculation but a philosophical choice. India envisions a world where power is shared, not monopolized, and where no single country dictates the rules of engagement. Multipolarity represents freedom. For India, it means being free from the constraints that come with aligning too closely with any one bloc. It means the ability to pursue partnerships with multiple centers of power: Russia, China, the European Union, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, without being pressured into exclusivity. This flexibility is vital for a nation that seeks both rapid development and geopolitical influence. When India trades with Russia for energy, works with China on infrastructure, negotiates with the Gulf states for resources, and builds ties with African nations for new markets, it demonstrates that it does not need to choose one path. Multipolarity allows India to diversify risks, increase opportunities, and maximize its bargaining power. In a world of competing powers, India can play the role of connector, mediator, and leader instead of being trapped as a follower. The rejection of unipolarity also carries deep symbolic meaning. America's dominance in global affairs was not only about economics or military might, it was also about narrative control. Washington sought to position itself as the ultimate judge of democracy, human rights, and development, often using these concepts selectively to justify interventions and punishments. India's choice to move beyond America's orbit challenges this monopoly over legitimacy. It asserts that no one nation has the right to define global values on behalf of others. India, with its democratic traditions and vast diversity, shows that alternative models of governance rooted in culture and history are equally valid. This is a revolutionary stance in a world where the West has long claimed moral superiority. By embracing multipolarity, India empowers itself and others to reject narratives of superiority and build a world based on equality. The economic benefits of multipolarity are equally significant. A unipolar system often creates dependency because smaller nations have few choices in trade and investment. For India, dependence on America risks subjecting it to tariff wars, sanctions, and arbitrary restrictions that could undermine its industries. A multipolar approach changes this dynamic completely. If one partner attempts coercion, India can turn to others. If America imposes tariffs, India can expand ties with Russia or ASEAN. If Europe restricts access to markets, India can deepen cooperation with Africa or Latin America. Multipolarity multiplies options, reducing vulnerability and enhancing resilience. It also fosters competition among partners, ensuring that India negotiates from a position of strength rather than weakness. There is also a political empowerment that comes with this shift. In a unipolar world, nations often find themselves pressured into adopting policies that do not align with their own interests. India has felt this pressure repeatedly, whether in calls to abandon Russian defense imports, reduce energy ties with sanctioned countries, or align more aggressively against China. Such demands ignored India's unique circumstances and reduced its sovereignty to a bargaining chip. In a multipolar world, however, no single power can demand obedience. Nations can pursue independent policies without fear of isolation, because alternative partnerships always exist. For India, this creates the space to design policies that truly reflect national priorities rather than external demands. On the global stage, multipolarity also enhances India's role as a voice for the global South. Many developing nations have long suffered under systems designed to favor the West, from trade regimes that disadvantage their industries to international institutions dominated by Western influence. By championing multipolarity, India aligns itself with the aspirations of these nations for fairness and equality. Platforms like BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the G20 are vehicles for this vision, where India can work alongside others to challenge Western dominance and build inclusive frameworks. India's leadership in these groups is strengthened by its decision to reject dependency on America, as it shows that it is willing to act on the principles it advocates. Another important dimension of multipolarity is security. America's dominance has often been expressed through military alliances and interventions, projecting power globally to maintain control. For India, reliance on such a system would have meant compromising its independence in defense and strategic matters. Multipolarity, however, opens opportunities for more balanced security arrangements. By working with Russia on defense technology, cooperating with China in regional forums, and engaging with other partners across Asia, India creates a networked approach to security that does not rely on a single guarantor. This is crucial in preventing dependency and ensuring that India remains capable of defending its sovereignty under any circumstances. The embrace of multipolarity is also deeply connected to India's identity as a rising power. To be a global leader, India cannot remain bound within another nation's framework. Leadership requires independence of thought and action, the courage to challenge the status quo, and the vision to build something new. By turning away from dependency on America, India signals to the world that it is not a junior partner in someone else's story, it is the author of its own narrative. This sense of ownership over its destiny is what makes multipolarity not just a strategy but a declaration of ambition. It is India asserting that it belongs at the table where the rules are written not as a guest but as a host. Critics may argue that multipolarity risks fragmentation or instability, as too many competing centers of power can lead to conflict. But this argument often reflects a fear of losing dominance rather than a genuine concern for stability. In reality, multipolarity creates balance. When no single power can dominate, powers are forced to negotiate, compromise, and respect the sovereignty of others. For India, this environment is far more conducive to its interests than one where it must constantly resist pressure from a single hegemon. Multipolarity, therefore, is not about chaos, it is about fairness. It distributes influence more evenly and ensures that nations of all sizes have a voice in shaping global affairs. The decision to embrace multipolarity also resonates deeply with India's people. For generations, Indians have watched as their nation was often treated as peripheral in global decision-making, its voice overshadowed by larger powers. The move away from dependency on America and toward diversified partnerships reflects the aspirations of 1 billion people who believe their nation deserves respect. It fosters pride and confidence, showing that India no longer seeks approval but demands equality. This internal confidence is as important as external positioning, for a nation that believes in its own sovereignty is far better equipped to defend it on the world stage. In practical terms, India's multipolar vision requires careful management of relationships, but this is a strength, not a weakness. It compels India to engage in diplomacy, negotiation, and coalition building on a scale that enhances its influence. Instead of being locked into rigid alliances, India can adapt to changing circumstances, forging partnerships where interests align and maintaining independence where they do not. This adaptability is what ensures long-term resilience, allowing India to thrive in a world where shifts in power are constant. Ultimately, India's rejection of dependency on America and its embrace of multipolarity is an act of both liberation and leadership. It liberates India from the constraints of a world order dominated by one nation and allows it to pursue policies true to its own interests. At the same time, it positions India as a leader in shaping a new order where equality, fairness, and sovereignty are the guiding principles. This is not only about India's rise, but about the transformation of global politics itself. In multipolarity, India sees not just an opportunity for itself, but a future where all nations, big and small, can stand with dignity. It is this vision that gives India's choice its historic significance and its enduring power. India's choice to end its heavy reliance on trade with the United States and turn instead toward building stronger ties with Russia, China, and other global partners is more than a geopolitical maneuver. It is the beginning of a new era of independence and self-determination. This decision signifies that India will no longer allow its economic future, strategic choices, or developmental trajectory to be dictated by another power. For decades, trade with America carried with it an invisible chain of dependency. Washington used access to its markets and financial systems as leverage to pressure India on defense purchases, foreign policy decisions, and even internal economic reforms. Now, by decisively moving away from this dependency, India is declaring that it will chart its own path, free of external manipulation. This is a declaration of sovereignty, a statement that India's future will be written in New Delhi, not in Washington. At the core of this shift is a recognition that true power lies in independence. A nation that builds its economy around one partner risks collapse the moment that relationship falters. India has seen this reality before, whether in the form of US tariffs on steel and aluminum, restrictions on tech exports, or threats of sanctions over oil imports from Iran and Russia. Each of these instances revealed how vulnerable a country becomes when it relies too heavily on a single power. Ending trade dependence on America is India's way of ensuring that no external actor can hold its economy hostage again. By turning toward Russia and China, while also diversifying ties with Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East, India secures multiple streams of energy, investment, and trade. This web of relationships creates a foundation that cannot be shaken by the whims of one government or the changes of one election cycle abroad. This decision also carries immense symbolic power for India's citizens. It sends a message that the era of compromises forced upon the nation by external actors is over. For too long, Indians have watched their leaders balance between appeasing Washington and protecting national interests. Now, India is signaling that it will no longer sacrifice sovereignty for temporary economic favors. This sense of independence strengthens national pride and unifies the people behind a shared vision of self-reliance. It connects directly to India's historical struggle for freedom from colonialism, reminding its citizens that political independence achieved in 1947 must now be matched by economic and strategic independence in the 21st century. The chains of dependency are finally being broken. By choosing independence, India also positions itself to rise as a global superpower. A superpower cannot afford to be anyone's junior partner. If India had continued aligning too closely with the United States, it would always be seen as following Washington's lead, a secondary power rather than a leader in its own right. By turning to Russia and China, and more broadly to a multipolar framework, India demonstrates its capacity to engage with equals and rivals alike without being absorbed into their agendas. This independence is the mark of true leadership. It allows India to act as a bridge between East and West, North and South, fostering dialogues that no other nation can manage. In this role, India not only secures its own growth, but also shapes the emerging world order. Energy security is one of the clearest examples of how independence benefits India's future. American policies often restricted India's access to affordable energy. Whether through sanctions on Iran or pressure to cut imports from Russia, these restrictions threaten to undermine India's growth, as energy is the backbone of industrialization and modernization. By rejecting dependency and deepening ties with Russia, India gains access to reliable, discounted oil and natural gas supplies, ensuring that its economy remains fueled regardless of Western sanctions. Similarly, working with China opens opportunities in renewable energy technologies, battery manufacturing, and critical minerals, sectors vital for the energy transition. Independence in energy means independence in growth, as no foreign power can dictate when India's factories run or when its lights turn on. Defense cooperation is another pillar of India's self-determined future. American defense ties, though valuable, often came with strings attached. Restrictions on technology transfer, conditions on usage, and political interference in strategic decisions. By balancing these ties with deepened cooperation with Russia, India ensures it retains a steady supply of advanced weaponry without being trapped in dependency. Russian defense partnerships are historically based on trust and transfer of technology, enabling India to build its own defense industry. This empowers India to safeguard its sovereignty without being bound to American approval. At the same time, limited but pragmatic cooperation with China in regional forums helps reduce tensions and stabilize borders, preventing unnecessary conflict that could slow India's rise. The choice of independence also reshapes India's economic model. Relying too much on America tied India to Western financial institutions and corporations, which often imposed conditions that served their own interests. Now, by turning toward Russia, China, and the broader global South, India participates in building alternative financial systems from the BRICS, New Development Bank, to currency settlement frameworks that bypass the US dollar. This reduces vulnerability to sanctions and creates room for India to negotiate fairer terms of trade. It also enables India to invest more deeply in South-South cooperation, opening new markets in Africa and Latin America while avoiding the exploitative structures of Western-dominated trade regimes. Perhaps most importantly, this independence strengthens India's voice in global diplomacy. When a nation is tied too closely to one superpower, its ability to advocate for global reform is weakened. How can a country argue for fairness in the World Trade Organization or climate talks if it is bound by the policies of its largest partner? By breaking free from dependency, India gains the freedom to speak for itself and for the global South. It can demand reforms in international institutions, push for greater representation of developing nations, and advocate for global equity without fear of retaliation from Washington. This enhances India's credibility as a leader of the non-aligned and post-colonial world, a role it has historically cherished but was constrained from fulfilling under unipolar dominance. The journey toward independence is not without its challenges. Critics warn that closer ties with Russia and China may create new dependencies or entangle India in their rivalries with the West. But India's strategy is not about replacing one dependency with another, it is about diversification. By engaging with multiple powers simultaneously, India ensures that no single partner gains overwhelming influence. This balance is the essence of sovereignty. It requires skillful diplomacy and constant recalibration, but it is precisely this flexibility that allows India to remain independent in a world of competing giants. The alternative, remaining tethered to America, would have been far riskier, as it would have left India vulnerable to one country's changing politics and interests. This independence is also about building a future rooted in self-reliance. Initiatives like Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat are not just slogans, they are part of a broader vision of a nation that produces, innovates, and sustains itself without depending on external approval. By rejecting dependency on America, India accelerates these programs, ensuring that domestic industries flourish, indigenous technology develops, and jobs are created for its vast population. Economic self-reliance is inseparable from strategic independence, and together they form the foundation of India's rise as a global superpower. India's decision to end its reliance on America and embrace a diversified multipolar future is therefore the defining moment of its modern history. It is not a retreat from globalization, but an assertion of equality within it. It is not isolationism, but engagement on India's own terms. It is the confidence of a nation that knows it no longer needs to be led. It can lead. This is the dawn of a new era, one in which India controls its alliances, secures its energy, empowers its industries, and asserts its voice as a global power. This independence is not just about trade or politics, it is about destiny, and India has chosen to seize it. India has taken a decision that will be remembered for generations, not as a break, but as a rebirth. By ending dependency on America, by turning boldly toward Russia, China, and the broader global South, we have declared to the world that our destiny is our own. We will not be dictated to, we will not be pressured, we will not be used as a pawn in someone else's game. This is the dawn of India's true independence, the freedom to decide our partners, to secure our resources, to lead with dignity in a multipolar world. The chains of dependency are broken, and in their place stands a nation rising, confident and unshaken, with its eyes firmly fixed on the horizon of greatness. Let the world know, India will not follow, it will lead. India will not bow, it will rise. India will not compromise its sovereignty, it will shape its destiny. The age of dependency is over. The age of India has begun.